Good morning. If you have a Bible, and I hope you do, let me invite you to open with me to Job chapter 3. And if you don't have a Bible, let me encourage you, whenever you come in to this worship gathering, in the lobby outside, there are free Bibles that are available to anyone who needs them. But Job chapter 3. Last week we looked at Job 1 and 2, and we saw Job's possessions taken away, his children pass away, and then his health is stripped out from underneath him. And we left with Job at the end of chapter 2 sitting in a trash heap with oozing sores and boils all over his body. And yet in the middle of it, saying, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." And we see Job glimpsing the sovereignty of God in his suffering and worshiping. And that's when tragedy struck. Today we're going to dive into when tragedy continues. It's one thing, it's an amazing thing, but it's one thing to respond in worship when tragedy strikes. It's an entirely different picture when suffering continues. Suffering lingers like many of you have experienced, not just at one time, but for days, months, even years. And this morning, we're going to get a glimpse into the lives of two families alongside Job from this faith family. Many of you know John Brokaw and Gwen Brobst, members of this faith family that over the last few months passed away of cancer. And the Brokaws and the Brobsts have graciously agreed to let us glimpse into their lives, not just when suffering happened, but now when suffering continues. And so I want to let them introduce the journey they have been on and the journey they find themselves on now. Watch this with me.
John was a very godly man. We met on a singles retreat when we lived in Dallas together. And he was just a great leader in our family. One of his favorite books is Point Man, and that really summarizes John. He was always pointing us in the right direction. He was diagnosed with malignant melanoma back in May of 2007 and just went through treatment for a year. I didn't have a lot of hope when he was diagnosed. My father passed away from the same thing, and we were, just going to do all that we could.
I sat down with my dad on the back porch at our house, and we just sat and talked for a good while about what this would mean, him having cancer, just accepting the fact that he wasn't going to be with us anymore, and accepting the fact that my dad wasn't going to be at my wedding and that my dad wasn't going to get to see me grow up.
We had hope. The doctors have all kinds of treatments, but there was a point where they really said, we don't have anything else. And that's really hard, because I think there was always the hope that there would be more time at least. It was very hard. It's hard to see someone slipping away from you, someone that you've been with for so long.
There was one talk that me and my dad had, and he was just so ready to move on and be with Christ. And I told him, "Dad, I don't think I'm ready for this. I really don't." He told me, "Marissa, this is God's plan, whether we like it or not, and it's a good plan. Trust in him. He's going to protect you. He's going to take care of you when I'm gone."
Gwen and I met when she was 16, I was 17. I was 21. I asked her to marry me, and she said that she would. I guess we all say our marriage vow is pretty much the same, in sickness and in health, and until death do us part. I guess we don't really expect to have to go through the sickness of it, but I came home on a Thursday evening. I had been gone since Monday on a trip with work. And when I got home, she said, feel my abdomen right here. And when I did, it just made my blood run cold. As a physician, I knew that what I was feeling was not normal and was not good. And the firmness that was there in the upper part of her abdomen was chilling. We were able to get a hold of her doctor who was on call. And we were able to get her in for some tests right away. He said, I think she may have cancer. Everything seemed to stop right then and there.
When Mom was diagnosed with cancer a year ago, initially my reaction was to be anxious, to worry, and to think of all of the what ifs. They're the what ifs that say, what if Mom's not there when I get married someday? What if Mom's not there to help me raise my kids? I think that the only way to get through suffering and to have the strength for it is to be in the Word and to know the Word, because it's during those times of suffering that the Word is brought to you in your sleep, and it's brought to you in the moments of tears. And without the Word, that strength is not there. And to know God and to seek after Him, and that when you do hit that point of suffering, to know that He is the only way that you're going to get through it.
It begs the question, what does the Word say? That's what I want us to dive into today. I want us to see the implications of the book of Job, not just for when suffering strikes, but when it lingers and when it continues and we find ourselves on a journey and suffering is still there. Job 3, in one sense, doesn't make sense. Satan had challenged God, said, Job will curse you if these things happen. You get to the end of Job 1 and 2, both, and Job doesn't curse God, he worships God. And so you think, okay, that's it. You're successful. We should just jump right now to chapter 42, and that's how many people try to read this book. Everything's good, but there's a journey that happens between Job 2 and Job 42 that is real. And I want to dive into it today. I want you to listen to Job's words in Job chapter 3. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He said, may the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, a boy is born. That day may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine upon it. May darkness and deep shadow claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm its light. That night may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, nor be entered in any of the months. May that night be barren. May no shout of joy be heard in it. May those who curse days curse that day. Those who are ready to rouse Leviathan, may its morning stars become dark. May it wait for daylight in vain and not see the first rays of dawn. For it did not shut the doors of the womb on me to hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest, with kings and counselors of the earth who built for themselves places now lying in ruins, with rulers who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn child, like an infant who never saw the light of day? There the wicked cease from turmoil, and there the weary are at rest. Captives also enjoy their ease. They no longer hear the slave drivers shout. The small and the great are there, and the slave is freed from his master. Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul? To those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than for hidden treasure, who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For sighing comes to me instead of food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. Isn't that heavy? Job finds himself one chapter later cursing the day of his birth. And the picture here is after 7 days of silence, and he's surrounded by friends, so-called friends, a guy named Eliphaz, a guy named Bildad, and a guy named Zophar. And they've sat for 7 days just looking at Job in a trash heap with sores and boils all over his body. And for 7 days, nobody said anything. And these words that we just read are the first words that come out of Job's mouth. And what I want us to see today, we're going to look at an overview, kind of a bird's eye view, and we'll be all over the place. But from chapter 3 to 31, Job enters into conversations with these three friends. And basically the way it works after Job speaks here in Job chapter 3 is Eliphaz speaks to Job, then Job responds. Then Bildad speaks, then Job responds. Then Zophar speaks, and Job responds. That happens 3 different times, 3 different cycles, except one of them tails off at the end. And the picture is a dialogue between a man who loves God, who is completely committed to God, who has worshiped God in the middle of his suffering, who is upright, blameless, fears God, shuns evil, all the things we saw last week, but he's wrestling with the mystery of God's ways. And there's an honest wrestling all over the pages of this part of Job. And what I want us to see is 4 pictures of the sufficiency of God in the middle of Job's suffering. 4 pictures of his sufficiency that I believe have huge implications for our lives when suffering lingers for days, months, and years. Picture number 1. When the pain of suffering persists, God is still present. When the pain of suffering persists, God is still present. What you'll see, if you read through 3 to 31, is you'll see Job in just about every single one of his speeches. He addresses God in some way. He knows God is there. This is part of his wrestling. He's not necessarily doubting God is there. He knows the presence of God and the character of God, and he's wrestling with why these things are happening in light of the presence and the character of God. In fact, you look at what we just read, chapter 3, you might circle all of his questions and see the word they begin with. Verse 11. What word does his question begin with? Why? Why did I not perish at birth? Verse 12. Why were there knees to receive me? And you get to verse 16. Why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn child? Verse 20. Why is light given to those in misery? Verse 23. Why is life given to a man? As the pain in Job's life progressed and began to settle in, this question rose to the top. Why? And you've got this in your notes. When we are going through, when the pain of suffering persists, we want an explanation. We want to know why. And this is natural. It's not wrong to ask God why. But we're going to dive deeper next week into the purpose of God in suffering. Suffice to say at this point, we need to keep this question why in proper perspective. I'm convinced that what Job is teaching us, this book is teaching us, is that in the middle of the pain of suffering, we do not need an explanation as much as we need presence. Now, I want to give you this truth and I want to explain it to you. We want an explanation. What does God give us? God gives us Himself. God gives us Himself. If there was any opportunity God had to give us an explanation for suffering and evil, this was the book. This was the time. Instead, we see Job wrestling with the presence of God all throughout. You see it here in chapter 3, verse 23. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? Who has hedged Job in? God's done this. Sovereignty, just like we saw last week. Flip over to chapter 7. Look at chapter 7, verse 17. Job's wrestling again. Listen to what he says. What is man that you make so much that you make so much of him, that you give him so much attention. Verse 18, you examine him every morning and test him every moment. Will you never look away from me or let me alone, even for an instant? He's wrestling with the presence of God. Fast forward all the way to the very last chapter in the book, Job chapter 42. And we'll dive into this more in depth last week of the month. But look in Job 42. Look at verse 4. This is where the whole picture is headed. Job encounters God personally in a very poignant, powerful way at the end of this book. And listen to what he says. Job 42:4. You said, listen now, and I will speak, and I will question you, and you shall answer me. Listen to verse 5. Job says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This is the whole point. Part of the whole point of the book of Job is to show us wrestling with the presence of God and ultimately the power of the presence of God in the middle of suffering. We want an explanation. God gives us His presence, Himself. Now I know that some of you are thinking, well, I still would like an explanation. And we still have those questions. But do we really want an explanation? Do we really need an explanation? Think about it with me. Two simple illustrations. A couple of years ago, it was actually right after I started just preaching and filling in here, I broke my wrist playing flag football. And I remember my brother took me to the emergency room, and we got there and checking in, and the nurse asks that question that just doesn't make sense. What level of pain do you have? How bad does it hurt? 1 to 10. I'm like, very. I mean, it hurts. I'm writhing in pain. Now, what do I need in that moment in my pain? Do I need the doctor to come and show me the x-ray and give me a medical explanation with all of his expertise about how my wrist is broken, at what part, and how this happens, and the whole history and how it led to this point? No. I want him to fill me with something, and fill me with something fast that can take care of this pain. What I need is not an explanation. I need something to fill me, meet me at my deepest point of need, which is not intellectual. Another illustration. I have a lot of things to learn in marriage, but this I think I have learned. I think I continually have to learn this over and over again. But when my wife Heather is going through difficulties, when she is going through struggles, what I've learned is that her greatest need amidst her struggles is probably not my explanations. I'm guessing there are some ladies who would say amen to that. Probably not my advice. Probably not my summary of why this is going on. What's her greatest need? At that point, it's presence. And the beauty of this picture in Job is that we don't see a God who is distant up in heaven doling out philosophical explanations for why this is happening. Instead, we see a God who is right with Job every single step of the way. And this is gospel, ladies and gentlemen, it's gospel. We do not have a God who is distant, far off from us. We have a God who is with us, a God who became like us and who is able, Hebrews 4 says, to sympathize with our weaknesses. Are you broken? He was broken. If you've been rejected, He was rejected. Are you hurting? He hurt. Do you cry out? He cried out. Do you ask why? Listen to Him on the cross. My God, what? Why have you forsaken me? He is familiar with our struggles. And the reminder I want to give you from this overall picture in the book of Job, as you walk through suffering, whatever that looks like in your life, I want to remind you that God has not abandoned you. He never abandons you. He is with you. In the middle of your suffering, He is with you. You are not alone. Job is going to feel alone over and over and over again because of his friend's counsel. You'll see this, but the whole conclusion that he comes to is, I've not been alone. I see you. When the pain of suffering persists, God is still present. Second picture, when the gifts we enjoy in this life are gone, this is the sufficiency of God. He is still good. When the gifts we enjoy are gone, God is still good. Now this takes us back again to the setup in Job chapter 1 and 2. Satan had challenged God and said, Job worships you, God, because you pay him to worship you. Look at all the gifts he has. Of course he worships you. You take away the gifts, he won't worship you. He takes away the gifts. Job worships at the end of Job chapter 1. Well, he's still got health. He takes away health. And Job comes to Job 2:10 and he says, I received good from God and trouble from God. This is the picture of Job showing Satan, the world, us, that even when the gifts we enjoy are gone, there's wrestling there, and there's prevalent wrestling all over chapter 3 through 31, but God is still good. Now, this is where his friends really come in, because what they propose is a theology. Now, I want us to be careful here. You read Job 3 through 31, and you listen to Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar speak, and you'll hear them say some true things, some good things, some theologically sound things. But this is the danger. What they're doing is they're taking truths, theological truths, and they're twisting them and distorting them in the way they're applying them to Job's situation. And all of a sudden, these theological truths, good theological truths, are becoming horrible counsel for Job. And basically, in a nutshell, their counsel is this. Job, God blesses, God prospers the righteous, and God afflicts the wicked. God blesses or prospers the righteous, and he afflicts the wicked or the unrighteous. Since Job is afflicted, then he must be what? Unrighteous. Therefore, Job, your problem is you're unrighteous. You've done something to dishonor God, and therefore the way to make it right is to get righteous, to turn back to God, and everything will be okay. Let me show this to you. Go to chapter 4. We'll look at Eliphaz first. Listen to chapter 4, verse 7. Listen to what he says. He says, Job, consider now, who being innocent has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. At the breath of God they are destroyed. At the blast of his anger they perish. Let me encourage you on a side note, when someone is walking through suffering, not to quote Job 4, 7 through 9. Listen to what he's saying there. The way I've seen it, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. You're obviously reaping it right now. This is the picture. You've obviously done something wrong. Go over to chapter 5, verse 18. Well, step back even one verse to verse 17. Listen to this. Now there's some truth, the grains of truth in here. Listen. Blessed is the man whom God corrects. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. For he wounds, but he also binds up. He injures, but his hands also heal. From 6 calamities he will rescue you. In 7 no harm will befall you. In famine he will ransom you from death, and in battle from the stroke of the sword. Now this is a big, you think, well, what's wrong with that advice? But you look at how it's being applied to Job. And what Eliphaz is saying here is that, Job, obviously you've done something wrong, so if you'll just get right with God, everything will be okay. It's that simple. God will change things. If you will change, repent, turn from your wickedness and your sin. That's what Eliphaz says. Get to chapter 8, and you see Bildad, and he takes it a step deeper. Listen to the boldness of Bildad. Look in verse 2. Bildad says this. Job, how long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? Listen to verse 4. When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. Did you catch that? Bildad just said, your children died because they were sinners in that house. That's why the wind came and blew the house down. Because your children had sinned. Then he brings it to Job. But if you will look to God and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your rightful place. Your beginnings will seem humble, so prosperous will your future be. Same advice Eliphaz had given. If you'll just get right with God, everything will be prosperous. Then you get to chapter 11, and you see Zophar enter in the picture. Now, all throughout, Job is claiming to be innocent. Now, we know Job isn't perfect. Job's not saying he's perfect, but he's saying exactly what we know from Job 1 and 2. There's nothing he's done to warrant what is happening here. And Zophar rebukes him for it. Look at chapter 11. Look at verse 4. You say to God, my beliefs are flawless, and I am pure in your sight. Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom has two sides. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin. And you get down to verse 13. He gives the same advice we've been seeing. Yet if you devote your heart to him and stretch out your hands to him, if you put away the sin that is in your hand and allow no evil to dwell in your tent, then you will lift up your face without shame. You will stand firm and without fear. You will surely forget your trouble, recalling it only as water's gone by. It'll be as water gone by if you'll just turn away from sin. And all throughout here, Job is saying, no, God brings affliction not just on the unrighteous, he brings afflictions on the righteous. In fact, sometimes it seems like God brings prosperity among the unrighteous and affliction on the righteous. He's wrestling with this. And his friends are putting forward this theology that says God always blesses the righteous and he always afflicts the unrighteous. And the reality is it's poor theology, and it's theology that is being proclaimed throughout much of contemporary Christianity today. So-called Christianity. You trust God, you follow God, you obey God, you will prosper. Have a great life. Successful. You disobey God, you don't trust God, then you will not prosper. Things will not go well with you. What I want you to see here is a false gospel and a true gospel. A false gospel that sees suffering as evidence of the displeasure of God. Now, I want to be careful here. I want to be careful because definitely in Scripture we see the effects of our sin, the consequences of our sin, bring struggle and bring suffering. There's no question. Again, this is where true theological things, twisted to apply to all suffering, become very, very bad counsel. Unbiblical, ungodly counsel, which is what's happening here. Yes, there are consequences of sin, but the picture here is Job has not done anything to warrant this. This is happening to him, and God is afflicting the righteous. A false gospel sees suffering as evidence of the displeasure of God. It's what many people believe. Many people say, if I just have enough faith, then God's going to bless me. You see it all over the TVs. I remember when this hit home for me, sitting in a house church in Asia with Asian believers who are risking their lives in a little village to worship Christ and study His Word in the middle of the night. And we were sitting there and they were asking questions. And this lady who was sitting near the front knew a little bit of English and lived in the city, had a TV. She said, "Teacher, sometimes when I'm watching TV, I get stations from the United States, and every once in a while I will get a church service from the United States." And she said, I see preachers dressed in very nice clothes and in extremely nice buildings. And she said, many of them say to me that if I have enough faith, I too can have all of these things. She wasn't indicting anything. She was asking honestly. She said, I come to our worship services. We're gathering late at night in secret. We're risking our lives, and most of us are dirt poor, just trying to get by. And she looked at me. She asked this question with all sincerity. She looked at me and she said, "Teacher, does this mean that we don't have enough faith here?" This is the gospel that we are exporting to the world. And it's not just health and wealth preachers on TV. It's us. It's the people who are surrounded by stuff and material possessions and things. And we tack God on the end on Sunday. And we say, He's given us all this stuff. And we trust in Him and He gives us all this stuff. And the reality is we are a people in a church culture that have so exalted the gifts of God above God Himself. The stuff above the giver. And that's idolatry. At the core, it's idolatry. And it's a false gospel that says, when we don't have those things to point the finger to God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you ordaining this to happen? Why are these things being taken away? Why am I suffering? A false gospel sees suffering as evidence of the displeasure of God. The true gospel sees suffering as a means to, get this, a means to more deeply treasure God. This is a radically different way to look at Christianity and to look at our lives. Suffering as a means to more deeply treasure God. This is what Job is learning and what he's showing us, showing Satan, the world, and us, that when all of these things are taken away, God is still a treasure to be had, and he's good. This is the picture. Think about it practically in our lives. If you had to reduce suffering, and I don't want to pretend like suffering is not a very complicated thing, but if you had to bring it down, isn't suffering when the things we enjoy in this world are taken from us? Maybe it's our reputation or our esteem among peers. Maybe it's our success. Maybe it's our job. You lose your job, again, suffering. Maybe we lose the house or the car or some stuff. Or maybe it's a lot deeper than that. Maybe we lose friends because of something that happens. We lose some friends. Maybe it's we lose our health. Maybe we lose our sight or our hearing or our ability to walk. We begin to experience suffering. Maybe we have cancer or some other disease, and we begin to experience suffering. We lose our health, or maybe we lose a loved one. Maybe we lose a mom or a dad or a husband or a wife or a child. When these things in the world that we enjoy are taken from us, suffering. Now here's the picture. If God is our treasure, above and over all of his gifts, then when one of these gifts is taken from us, in some way taken from us, then where does that drive us? It drives us deeper to the treasure who is God. Because we have one less thing, even one less great, good thing to lean on in this world, and God becomes a deeper treasure in our lives. I'm not saying there's not pain in losing that thing, there's not tears in losing that person, it's not hurt, it's not a deep sense of loss. There were pain, tears, hurt, the Garden of Gethsemane for Christ. It's not some easy, happy-go-lucky picture, but it is. It is a picture of saying that even when the best things of this world are taken from me, all they do is drive me deeper to my treasure in God. This is why Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, to live is Christ. How do you say this and really mean it? How do you say to live is Christ and to die is gain? Here's the only way you can say that. When life itself over here is stripped out from underneath you and you've got nothing left, your life is gone, it's gain. Why? Because it drives you where? All you've got is God. You've lost everything this world has to offer, everything, and all you've got is God. That's why he says, I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far, because he knows that the treasure over here is better than all of these things put together, better than my wife, my 2 boys, and all the great things this world has to offer. God is better. He's better. He's a treasure, and suffering drives us to treasure God. So when the gifts we enjoy are gone, when the house is gone or the job is gone, money's not there anymore, when we can't get pregnant, when you don't find that husband or wife that you're longing for, or when your sight is gone or your hearing is gone or your ability to walk is gone, or when your loved one is gone, God is still good. This is Job 13:15. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Because he's a treasure above all of those things. This is a radically different way to live in our culture today. When the gifts we enjoy are gone, God is sufficient. He is more than sufficient because he's present and he's good. Third picture. In the confusion of our circumstances, it's the sufficiency of God. In the confusion of our circumstances, God is all wise. I want you to turn with me to Job chapter 28. Job is a part of a group of books in the Old Testament called wisdom books. and they're pictures of wisdom. And tucked away close to the center of this book, Job 28, close to the end of these discussions, is basically a hymn to wisdom. And I want you to hear this picture of the price and the value of wisdom and the relationship between God and wisdom and man and wisdom. Look at Job chapter 28, verse 12. Key passage in the book of Job. Verse 12. Where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? Man does not comprehend its worth. It cannot be found in the land of the living. The deep says, it's not in me. The sea says, it's not with me. It can't be bought with the finest gold, nor can its price be weighed in silver. It can't be bought with the gold of Ophir, with precious onyx or sapphires. Neither gold nor crystal can compare with it, nor can it be had for jewels of gold. Coral and jasper are not worthy of mention. The price of wisdom is beyond rubies. The topaz of Cush cannot compare with it. It cannot be bought with pure gold. Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It's hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds of the air. Destruction and death say only a rumor of it has reached our ears. Listen to verse 23, though. Here's the contrast. Nobody can find it. God understands the way to it, and He alone knows where it dwells. He views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When He established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when He made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then He looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it, and He said to man, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. The picture is wisdom is this valuable jewel that can't be found by anyone except God. God alone knows where it dwells. Now, I want us to think about this. 3 facets of wisdom when you put them together. And this will inform what you've got in your notes. 3 facets of wisdom. You've got knowledge involved in wisdom. God alone knows where it dwells. You've got perspective involved in wisdom. He sees things from the ends of the earth. And then you've got experience involved in wisdom. He created all of these things. He confirmed wisdom, appraised wisdom, tested wisdom. So, contrast the limited wisdom of man for a moment with the unlimited wisdom of God. Then we'll bring that to bear on suffering. Limited wisdom of man. Why do we lack wisdom? It's because we lack one of these 3 things at different points, at every point. We lack, first of all, knowledge. When someone makes an unwise decision, oftentimes it's because they didn't know all the facts. You ever been in a situation where you make a decision, then you find out something later, and you think, well, if I'd have known that before, I'd have done something differently. We lack knowledge. We don't know all the factors that are involved. Second, we lack perspective. Sometimes our perspective is jaded or distorted. We don't know how other people will perceive this decision we make. We don't know everybody's point of view. We lack perspective on what would be the wisest decision. And then third, we lack experience. We know that if we've been through a particular experience, then we're wiser because of it. If you go through an experience for the first time, you don't know what to do. You go through it for the 100th time, you got a little better idea what to do. There's a wisdom that's there. Now that's the reason our wisdom is limited, because we lack knowledge. Even the smartest of us in this room. We lack perspective, even the most sensitive of us in this room, and we lack experience. Even those who have been through the most in this life. We lack these things. Compare that with the unlimited wisdom of God. What about His knowledge? God has perfect knowledge. God always has all the facts. God never finds out later, oh, if I'd have known that, I'd have done something different back here. He never says that, not once, because He knew it already. He knows everything. He knows every factor involved at all times in all history. He never finds out any new information. Don't fill God in on something He hadn't thought of. He has perfect knowledge. Second, He has eternal perspective. He views the ends of the earth, sees everything under the heavens. God understands, sees how every single detail of the universe affects every single person in the universe, not just every single person, but in all time, for all of eternity. God has a perspective that is completely and totally eternal and completely and totally all-encompassing. He has eternal perspective, and third, He has infinite experience. He established the wind and measured the waters. He makes decrees for the rain and paths for the thunderstorm. In other words, He's got some experience doing this governing of the universe. He created it, and He's governed it, and He's governed it forever, perfectly wise. He's not a rookie when it comes to wisdom. It comes to any experience that any one of us would go through. Now bring that to bear on the sufficiency of God in suffering. Absent an explanation to the why questions, how can we trust God in the darkness, and when the darkness continues day after day or week after week or month after month or year after year, and whatever that looks like in your life, how do you trust God? The only way you can trust God is if you know that He has perfect knowledge. He knows everything. He knows every circumstance and every factor that's at work here. There's nothing He's not aware of. He has eternal perspective. You see, I see right here. He sees what right here will do to affect this person in eternity. He sees what happens right here and how it will affect you for eternity. He has eternal perspective. He has infinite experience. God as Father, this is Luke 11:11-13. He gives good gifts to His children, and the wisdom of God reminds us that God always gives what is best. I will not pretend this is an easy truth when it comes to suffering, but it is a bedrock truth. Even when you get the call that your loved one has passed away and you fall down on the floor weeping, there's a confidence that can be had even there that says, God, you know what is best. I don't know what is best. You know what is best. Amidst the confusion of our circumstances, God is all wise. This is gospel. Christ, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, wisdom of God. Foolishness of the world, wisdom of God. Why crush your Son on a cross, God? That doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? Why? Because He has perfect knowledge of every single one of our sins in this room. He has an eternal perspective that 2,000 years later, you and I would be sitting in here worshiping Him for the salvation we have from all of our sins. And He has infinite experience. He has designed our salvation to reconcile us to Himself. All glory be to God for His great wisdom. His great wisdom. Tozer put it best. I love this quote. He said, with the goodness of God to desire our highest welfare, the wisdom of God to plan it, and the power of God to achieve it, what do we lack? What do we lack? With the goodness of God to desire our highest welfare, the wisdom of God to plan it, and the power of God to achieve it, what do we lack? God is infinitely wise, and we honor Him. We honor God when we trust Him in the dark because He is the one who holds wisdom. In the confusion of our circumstances, God is all wise. He is present, He is good, and He is wise. These are pictures of His sufficiency that ultimately lead us to this last picture. In the depth of our despair, God is our hope. God's our hope. I want you to come back with me to chapter 3. And I want you to see this continuing dialogue with Job and his friends. And I want you just to get a glimpse. And we're just going to fly through a couple different places. I want you to see the depth of Job's despair. You heard it in chapter 3, verse 11. Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? And it just gets more depressing after this. Go over to chapter 6. Chapter 6, verse 8. Listen to what Job says. All these are words from Job. Verse 8. Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant what I hope for, that God would be willing to crush me, to let loose His hand and cut me off. Then I would still have this consolation, my joy and unrelenting pain, that I had not denied the words of the Holy One. Chapter 7, verse 13. Oh, that God would crush me, he said in chapter 6. Chapter 7, verse 13. When I think my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint. Even then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions. So that, listen to this, I prefer strangling and death rather than this body of mine. I despise my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone. My days have no meaning. Do you ever feel that? Days have no meaning. Even to where he's saying, I prefer death. Get over to chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 20. He's longing. See the despair here. He's longing to die. Or, not my few days almost over. Turn away from me so I can have a moment's joy before I go to the place of no return, to the land of gloom and deep and shadow, to the land of deepest night, of deep shadow and disorder, where even the light is like darkness. Keep going to the right. Chapter 14, verse 13. Listen to what he says to God. If only 14:13, if only you would hide me in the grave and conceal me till your anger is past. If only you would set me a time and then remember me. Chapter 16, very end of chapter 16, verse 22. Job says, only a few years will pass before I go on to the journey of no return. Chapter 17, verse 1. My spirit is broken. My days are cut short. The grave awaits me. Surely mockers surround me. My eyes must dwell on their hostility. You get to the very end of that chapter, verse 13. If the only home I hope for is the grave, if I spread out my bed in darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? Who can see any hope for me? Will it go down to the gates of death? Will we descend together into the dust? You see this increasingly, seemingly hopeless picture in Job's life. This is the depth of despair, and it really kind of climaxes in chapter 19. Look at chapter 19, verse 13. This is where he kind of brings it all to a point. He has alienated my brothers from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My kinsmen have gone away. My friends have forgotten me. My guests and my maidservants count me a stranger. They look upon me as an alien. I summon my servant, but he does not answer. Though I beg him with my own mouth, my breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own brothers. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule me. All my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me. I am nothing but skin and bones. I have escaped with only the skin of my teeth. Have pity on me, my friends. Have pity, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh? It is the depth of despair. You feel the weight of this, the honesty in this. It can't go on. I don't want to go on. And those who cared about me before are eating away my flesh. Depth of despair. Now, don't miss it. He's crying out for hope in the depth of his despair. And he brings it to a point here. And I want you to listen. I want you to listen to what happens next. It is one of the most beautiful passages in all the book of Job. Listen to verse 23. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes. I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. Wow. Job reaches into his language and pulls out this word, Redeemer. Same word in the book of Ruth describing the champion of the oppressed. The same word in Proverbs that describes the defender of the weak. And the same word in Exodus that describes the deliverer of captives. And he says, I have a redeemer, a vindicator who lives. And in the end, isn't that a great phrase? This is not the end. Job says, this is not the end. This is not the end. In the end, I will see him. I'll see him in what? In my flesh, I will see God after my skin has been destroyed. What a great picture. Boils, gone. Sores, gone. Cancer, gone. Disease, gone. In the end, after my skin has been destroyed, in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him, not another. I will see with my own eyes how my heart yearns within me. This is the picture. This is the hope that Job clings to in the depth of his despair. And I believe it's twofold. And I want to bring it home to our sufficiency of God and our suffering in this room. Twofold hope that he clings to. Number one, he will heal. God will heal our bodies. He will heal our bodies. Job clings to this. Job believed that he would have a new body one day, see God, and we know this. This is gospel. This is Jesus died on the cross, rose from the grave, resurrected Lord, resurrected body. This is Romans chapter 8, verse 23 and following. We know that our suffering here is not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. The creation groans as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons. The what? The redemption, Redeemer, the redemption of our bodies. Romans chapter 8. That God brings redemption to our bodies. Now, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate in our day over whether or not God heals people of cancer or disease or other sickness. People ask, is God able to heal people of cancer or disease or other sickness? What's the answer to that? Absolutely. There's no cancer that God can't overcome. There's no disease that's too big for God. So is it okay then to pray for healing like that? Absolutely. Ask God, pray to God to show His power like that. But when you pray like that, do not forget the other truths that we have seen here in Job. Do not pray as Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar would have you pray, thinking if you'll just have enough faith, if you'll just believe enough, if you'll just get things right enough in your life, then it will happen. This is false gospel. We've seen this. It's false gospel. Just believe it'll happen. Have enough faith. Obey God enough. Be right enough, and it will happen. The reality is, we're seeing this in the book of Job. You may be wholehearted in your obedience to God and completely faithful in your obedience to Him. And the reality is, you may have the worst form of cancer or disease known in this life, and you may never be delivered from it in this life. Let's say that one more time. This is truth. Just let it soak in. You may be wholehearted and completely faithful in your obedience to God, husband, wife, children, honoring Him. And you may be struck tomorrow, today, with the worst form of cancer or disease. And you may never be delivered from it in this life. Does this mean that God will then be choosing not to show His power in your life? That is most definitively not what that means. Because the reality we're seeing here from Job 3 to 31 is this: even when the pain and the suffering persists, even when the depth of despair is dark, you still have hope. And there is a power from God that I believe in many ways outweighs any power to heal temporarily in this life. A power from God to sustain and say in the middle, though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. There is a term in our day that has become common. The term is cancer survivor. And the idea is that if you have cancer and you live through it, then you're a survivor. You've beat cancer. Apparently, if you have cancer and you don't live through it, then you are not a survivor. You've lost cancer. And ladies and gentlemen, that is not true. Here's why it's not true biblically. Here's why it's not true in light of what we've seen here. If you have cancer and you live through it, it doesn't mean you've won anything. In fact, if you have cancer and you live through it, but you still don't treasure God, then you have lost. In fact, cancer at that point has won because you're still convinced that you can live this life on your own, apart from the treasure who is God. But when you face cancer and it drives you to treasure God more than life itself and more than anything this life has to offer, then you win, regardless of whether or not you live or die. You're a cancer survivor. You win. This This, ladies and gentlemen, is John Brokaw and Gwen Brost. You want to see the power of God? When both of these individuals found out that they had deadly forms of cancer, they said, "My hope is in God." And when they were told the odds that were against them, they said, "My hope is in God," because comfort in cancer doesn't come from odds, it comes from God. And when they went through surgery, they said, "My hope is in God." And when they went through grueling chemotherapy week after week after week after week, they said, "My hope is in God." And when they received more bad diagnoses and more bad doctor's reports and more news of days or months to live, they said, "My hope is in God." And when I visited each of them by their bedside the week before they passed away, they whispered in their pain, "My hope is in God." And when they breathed their last breath, you know what they breathed? They breathed, "My hope is in God." That's surviving cancer. That is surviving cancer. And I say that because when they breathed that, said, "My hope is in God," and breathed their last breath, they were immediately transformed into the presence of Jesus Christ. And they said, "I know my Redeemer lives. I know my Redeemer lives, and that in the end I'm standing upon the earth with him, and after my skin has been destroyed in my flesh, I now see God. I myself, I see with my own eyes, I and not another, how my heart has yearned within me for this." That's surviving cancer. That's surviving cancer. That's walking through the middle of suffering and seeing the sufficiency of God. He does heal. He heals eternally. He heals eternally. He is our healer. He will heal our bodies, praise God. And second, this is our hope. He will heal our bodies and we will see his face. The picture here, foreshadowing Revelation chapter 22, verse 4. If you don't have Revelation 22, verse 4, underline in your Bible, circle with stars all around it. Let me encourage you to do that. If you don't live every day based on Revelation 22, 4, let me encourage you to do that. 5 words in the New Testament. They will see his face. This is the hope that wakes us up in the morning, that's with us when we lie down at night, that's with us in the hospital bed, that's with us when we're walking through this struggle or that struggle. There is coming a day, I will see his face. I'll see his face. I'll glimpse his greatness in all of its fullness. This is worth it amidst the depth of our despair. He is our hope. He's our hope. And so what I want to do is I want to give these families an opportunity to show you how the glimpse of God's greatness is clearest, not in the easiest times, but in the most difficult times. I want to give them an opportunity to tell you how they have seen the greatness of God, how they have seen his face. Watch this with me.
I think I saw God's mercy in those times when I cried out to God and I said, "God, why? Why is this your plan? Why would you do it this way?" I think those are the times when I had a very rebellious nature and have learned that truly all I have belongs to God. And when we trust in him and trust that he's going to work through our difficulties and work through our hardships, he reveals his glory through you in those situations. And in those moments, I had a lot of moments this year where I didn't trust in God and I didn't trust in his plan. And he comforted me still in those times.
The blessing in this tragedy was that it brought me to a point of weakness where I really experienced a new intimacy with God that I don't think I ever would have otherwise. I've just really seen that he's a loving father, that he's there in the good times, in the bad, that I can count on him for the guidance that I need, that he's there with me through everything.
I think from day one, we could see how God's hand was in Mom's cancer and how he was loving her through it. From the very beginning, he provided for her the opportunity to go to Sloan Kettering and to get treatment there, and so many times when she was discouraged, giving her joy through that, and giving her little blessings along the way that showed her that he was there.
I can't imagine loving her more than I did, more than I do. But I know from his word that Christ does. That's remarkable to me, that he loves her more than I love her. It's also a comfort at the same time. I saw a God who loved Gwen like she was his little girl. He treated her like a loving father would. He took care of her, and he kept her from stumbling and made sure that she was tucked in at night. He did everything a loving father would for her. And he let me see it, and I think he let me see it so that I would know, so that I would get that picture in my head, because it's there forever.
Knowing the simple fact, and just saying, hearing God say to me, "Be still and know that I am God," and knowing that who he is was never going to change, knowing that that in this situation he knew exactly what he was doing.
All gathered around there, we just huddled in, and I said to her, "We all love every minute, every second that we get to spend with you. But right now you need a new body, and we want you to go get it."
And I really think that there was another type of goodness that that I experienced in a strong way throughout this, and that is, God's greatest example of goodness and his promise of eternal life. I think that to me is the greatest example of God's goodness in someone going through this situation.
I'd go back to 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness, because it's when we are weak that he's able to show us that grace, and it is sufficient.